In the heart of a sprawling metropolis, where towering glass buildings scraped the sky and the hum of traffic never ceased, Alexander Grant strode purposefully along the crowded sidewalk. The midday sun cast sharp shadows between the high rises, and the city bustled with its usual frenetic energy, people rushing past each other, lost in their own worlds. Alexander's tailored suit and polished shoes made him stand out among the sea of hurried commuters, a man shaped by success and wealth, yet deeply immersed in thought. His mind churned with details of an impending business deal, one that promised to elevate his empire to new heights. The deal had consumed weeks of negotiation, every call and meeting weighing heavily on him. Despite the power and influence he wielded, a restlessness gnawed at him beneath the surface. The city around him seemed both familiar and alien, a place where fortunes were made, but where true connection often felt out of reach. As he walked, Alexander's gaze flickered to the faces around him, faces marked by determination, fatigue, hope, and despair. The clamor of the city was a constant reminder of the disparities that thrived here. His footsteps slowed unconsciously when he noticed, not far from the entrance of a busy subway station, a small figure huddled against the cold stone wall. A child sat alone on the cracked concrete, a thin blanket barely covering ragged clothes. Dirt smudged his cheeks, and his eyes, wide and watchful, scanned the moving crowd as if wary of invisible threats. The child's presence was a stark contrast to the glossy storefronts and the polished suits surrounding him. Alexander felt a flicker of discomfort, quickly masked by his usual control. He continued walking, but the image lingered in his mind, pulling his attention back. The city's noise, car horns, distant sirens, snippets of conversation, faded slightly as Alexander's thoughts fixated on the child. He recalled the countless meetings and strategic plans, the calculated moves that had brought him here, yet wondered what this child's world was like. The boy seemed fragile, yet there was a quiet resilience in his posture that defied the squalor. For a moment, Alexander's mind juxtaposed his own life with the child's. He thought of his penthouse office overlooking the city, the luxury cars, and the relentless pressures of the corporate world. In that space, decisions were made with precision, and every outcome measured in numbers and margins. But here in the raw streets, survival was a different game altogether. No spreadsheets or contracts, just the unyielding need to find food, shelter, and safety. Something unspoken tugged at Alexander's conscience, a subtle yet persistent pull that unsettled the carefully constructed barriers he maintained. He glanced around, noticing the indifference of the passers-by, their eyes sliding past the child as if he were invisible. The boy's gaze met his briefly, a flicker of recognition or perhaps a silent plea. Alexander hesitated, then took a few steps toward the child. His heart beat faster, not from fear, but from an unexpected surge of curiosity and empathy. The noise of the city seemed to dim further as he crouched down to the child's level, careful not to startle him. "Hey," Alexander said softly, his voice steady but gentle. "What's your name?" The boy's eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion flickering in their depths. He didn't answer immediately, instead shifting the thin blanket tighter around his shoulders. The cold air bit at exposed skin, and Alexander noticed the child's trembling hands. "I'm Alexander," he added, offering a small smile. "I'm not here to hurt you." The child's lips parted, words caught between caution and curiosity. Finally, a faint whisper escaped. "Eli." Alexander nodded, absorbing the simplicity of the name, the weight it carried for this small figure before him. He looked beyond the grime and ragged clothes to see a glimpse of innocence still intact, a fragile spark beneath layers of hardship. Around them, the city continued its relentless pace, oblivious to the quiet moment unfolding on the sidewalk. The contrast was stark. An immensely wealthy man kneeling beside a homeless child, two lives worlds apart, yet briefly intersecting on the same crowded street. For Alexander, this encounter was more than a fleeting distraction. It was a crack in the facade of his ordered existence, a reminder that the world he ruled was not uniform or fair. The child's presence posed an unspoken question, one that unsettled his carefully maintained certainty about success and happiness. He straightened up slowly, glancing once more at Eli. The boy's eyes held a mixture of wariness and something else, maybe hope or the faintest trust. Alexander felt an unfamiliar urge to linger, to understand rather than just observe. But the moment was fragile. The city's tide threatened to sweep them apart, and Alexander knew he could not stay here long. Yet as he turned to leave, a silent promise echoed within him. A promise to look beyond the glass towers and boardrooms, to see the stories hidden in the streets below. With one last look at the child, Alexander stepped back into the flow of pedestrians, carrying with him a question that would not soon be forgotten. What did this boy want most in the world? The city's relentless rhythm seemed to pulse around Alexander as he found himself drawn back to the spot where the child had sat moments before. The hum of traffic, the chatter of hurried commuters, all became background noise to a growing sense of unease gnawing at him. He scanned the sidewalk, but Eli was gone, swallowed by the city's crowd like a shadow, fading into dusk. Yet the encounter lingered vividly in Alexander's mind, stirring thoughts he had long suppressed beneath layers of ambition and control. Unable to resist, Alexander turned his steps back toward the subway entrance, the place where he had first seen the boy. He moved with purpose now, weaving through clusters of people whose lives seemed so different from his own. The contrast was stark. His world of boardrooms, high-stakes negotiations, and strategic dominance, and this raw, chaotic street where survival was a daily struggle. He spotted Eli again, huddled near the base of a lamppost, his small frame wrapped tightly in that same threadbare blanket. The boy's eyes flickered up, wary but less guarded than before. Alexander approached slowly, mindful not to startle him. "Eli," Alexander said gently, crouching down to meet his gaze once more. "Can I ask you something?" His voice was steady, but beneath it lay a genuine curiosity. The boy nodded hesitantly, his eyes searching Alexander's face for any sign of deceit. "What do you want most in the world?" Alexander asked, the question simple, but carrying a weight that surprised even himself. For a long moment, Eli said nothing. His gaze drifted past Alexander, as if searching the distant skyline or the chaotic streets for an answer too vast to voice. Then, in a quiet, tentative voice, he spoke. "I want a place to call home," Eli said, his words fragile but clear. "A place where I'm not scared." Alexander felt an unexpected ache stir within him. The answer was so pure, so human, that it shattered the barriers he had built around his heart. Here was a child whose greatest desire was not wealth, fame, or power, but the simple, profound need for safety and belonging. The boy's honesty struck a chord deep inside Alexander, forcing him to confront realities he had long ignored. His mind flashed to his own penthouse, a luxurious cage filled with polished surfaces and empty echoes. Despite all his success, he realized he had never truly understood what it meant to feel secure. Eli's gaze met his again, steady now, as if daring Alexander to see beyond the surface. "Sometimes," the boy added softly, "I just want someone to care." The vulnerability in those words cut through Alexander's usual defenses. He had built his empire on calculated moves and guarded emotions, but here was a raw truth that no amount of money could buy. Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out a small packet of crackers he had grabbed from a nearby cafe. He held it out to Eli, who hesitated before accepting the offering, his fingers trembling slightly. The boy's gratitude was unspoken but palpable, a silent acknowledgement of this small kindness. As Eli nibbled on the crackers, Alexander found himself watching the child's cautious hopefulness. It was a stark reminder that beneath the city's glittering surface lay countless stories of struggle and resilience, stories he had never taken the time to hear. Around them, the world moved on indifferent to their quiet exchange. People brushed past without a glance, absorbed in their own lives and concerns. Yet for Alexander, this moment marked a shift, a crack in the armor of his carefully curated existence. He wanted to know more, to understand the boy's world, the dangers he faced, and the dreams he dared to hold on to. The question he had asked was simple, but the answer revealed a complexity that unsettled and intrigued him. "Eli," Alexander said gently, "would you like to tell me your story? If you want to." The boy looked at him, eyes wary but flickering with a hesitant trust. Slowly, he nodded. Alexander settled beside him on the cold stone, their worlds converging in a way that felt both fragile and profound. As Eli began to speak, recounting days spent searching for food, nights spent hiding from dangers lurking in the shadows, Alexander listened intently. The stories were raw and unfiltered, tales of hunger, loneliness, and fleeting moments of kindness from strangers. Eli spoke of shelters that were overcrowded and unwelcoming, of the constant fear that tomorrow might be worse than today. Alexander's mind raced, absorbing every detail, each word unraveling the neat compartments of his understanding. He realized how little he had seen of the city's underbelly, how insulated his life had been from the harsh truths faced by those like Eli. At times, Eli's voice trembled with sorrow. At others, a spark of resilience shone through, a testament to the child's indomitable spirit. Alexander felt a growing respect for this fragile figure who navigated a world so different from his own with such quiet bravery. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the sidewalk, Alexander knew this encounter was more than a chance meeting. It was a mirror held up to his own life, reflecting questions he had yet to answer. What did it mean to be truly successful? What was the value of wealth if it could not provide the basic human needs Eli so desperately sought? And most unsettling of all, how could he, a man of immense power and resources, turn away from this reality? Eli's honest answer to his simple question had opened a door Alexander had forgotten existed. It was a door that led not to financial gain or status, but to empathy, understanding, and perhaps something far more meaningful. As they sat together amidst the noise of the city, a silent bond began to form. A fragile connection between two lives shaped by vastly different circumstances, but united by a shared humanity. Alexander glanced down at Eli, whose tired eyes now held a glimmer of hope. He knew this was only the beginning of a journey neither of them could yet foresee, but one that promised to challenge everything they thought they knew about the world and about themselves. In the days that followed, Alexander found himself drawn deeper into the world Eli inhabited, a world that existed on the fringes of the city's polished facade. He shadowed the boy from a discreet distance, observing the daily struggles that Eli faced with a mixture of fascination and growing unease. The city, once a backdrop of opportunities and ambitions, now revealed its harsher realities. The hunger, the cold nights, the constant vigilance against dangers unseen by most. Alexander watched as Eli navigated the labyrinth of alleyways and backstreets with practiced caution, his small frame moving swiftly to avoid the gaze of those who might do him harm. The boy searched for scraps of food discarded behind restaurants, avoided confrontations with aggressive passers-by, and sought shelter wherever he could find it. A narrow alcove beneath a fire escape, a cramped doorway temporarily shielded from the biting wind. Each scene etched itself into Alexander's mind, painting a stark contrast to the life he led. In his penthouse office high above the city, decisions were made with a detached precision, each move calculated to maximize profit and power. But here, on the streets below, survival was a fragile balance of hope and caution, of resilience against relentless adversity. As Alexander followed Eli through these moments, flashes of his own past surfaced unbidden. He saw in Eli's cautious optimism a reflection of his younger self. Years ago, before the suits and boardrooms, before the relentless climb to success. Back then, his life had been marked by loneliness and uncertainty, a stark contrast to the empire he now commanded. The memories were bittersweet, nights spent in cramped apartments, the absence of steady support, the weight of expectations too heavy for a child. Alexander realized that beneath his polished exterior lay a reservoir of pain and sacrifice, emotions he had long buried beneath ambition. Eli's resilience in the face of hardship stirred something deep within him. The boy's innocence, tempered by harsh experience, began to chip away at Alexander's emotional defenses. He saw not just a homeless child, but a survivor, a young soul clinging to hope amid despair. One chilly evening, Alexander trailed Eli to a crowded shelter on the city's edge. The building was worn and overcrowded, a stark departure from the gleaming towers that marked Alexander's usual haunts. Inside, the air was thick with a mix of fatigue, desperation, and fleeting moments of kindness. Eli moved quietly among the other occupants, his eyes scanning for a familiar face or a safe corner. Alexander observed from a shadowed doorway, noting the boy's guarded demeanor and the unspoken rules that governed this fragile community. It was a world of unsteady trust, where small acts of generosity meant survival, and danger lurked in unexpected places. As Eli settled on a threadbare mattress, Alexander's thoughts drifted to his own childhood, a time when he, too, had sought comfort in unlikely places, relying on inner strength and fleeting connections. The parallels were undeniable, yet the chasm between their current realities yawned wide. Alexander's heart ached with a mixture of guilt and determination. He had built a life of privilege and influence, yet he had been blind to the struggles unfolding just beyond his windows. Eli's story was a mirror reflecting the gaps in his understanding, challenging him to reconsider what success truly meant. In the days that followed, Alexander's observations deepened. He saw Eli confront moments of fear, being chased away by strangers who saw him as a nuisance, the sting of hunger gnawing at his small frame, the loneliness that seemed to settle like a shadow. Yet amid these hardships, Eli's spirit remained unbroken. There were fleeting moments of joy, too, a shared laugh with a fellow shelter resident, the warmth of a kind word from a volunteer, the rare comfort of a hot meal. These glimpses of humanity underscored the complexity of life on the streets, a tapestry woven from threads of pain and hope. Alexander's own reflections grew more profound. He recognized that his wealth and power, while vast, had not shielded him from loneliness and the yearning for connection. Eli's courage illuminated the emotional walls Alexander had built around himself, walls that success alone could not dismantle. One afternoon, as the city bustled beneath a gray sky, Alexander approached Eli with a quiet determination. "I want to help," he said simply, meeting the boy's wary gaze. "Not just today or tomorrow, but in a way that matters." Eli looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Why?" he asked, skepticism lacing his voice. "Because no one should have to live like this," Alexander replied. "Because I've been blind to what's right in front of me. And because I think it's time to change that." The boy studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, a fragile trust beginning to take root. As they walked together through the city's streets, Alexander felt the weight of responsibility settle upon him. Eli's world was a stark reminder of the failures that prosperity often masked, the systemic issues that left too many vulnerable and unseen. Yet amid the challenges, Alexander sensed a path forward, one that would require more than charity or fleeting gestures. It demanded understanding, commitment, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. That night, alone in his penthouse overlooking the city lights, Alexander reflected on the day's revelations. Eli's resilience and innocence had cracked open a door within him, a door leading away from isolation and toward empathy. He realized that this journey was not just about helping a single child, but about rediscovering his own humanity. It was a chance to bridge the divide between two vastly different worlds and to find meaning beyond the confines of wealth and power. As the city stretched out beneath him, alive with countless untold stories, Alexander resolved to listen more closely, to see more clearly, and to act with purpose. Eli's story was no longer just the story of a homeless child. It was a catalyst for transformation, both for the boy and for the man who had finally begun to understand what truly mattered. Over the next several days, Alexander and Eli's paths crossed with increasing frequency, their unlikely connection growing amidst the sprawling city's indifferent pulse. Alexander found himself deliberately seeking the boy out, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and an emerging sense of responsibility. Each encounter peeled back layers of Eli's story, revealing the circumstances that had led him to the streets and the resilience that kept him moving forward. One afternoon, as a cold wind swept through the city, Alexander met Eli near a small park tucked away between towering office buildings. The boy sat alone on a worn bench, his gaze fixed on the ground, fingers nervously twisting a frayed piece of cloth. Alexander approached quietly, settling beside him without intrusion. "Do you want to talk?" Alexander asked softly. Eli looked up, eyes wary but open. "I guess," he replied, voice hesitant. As the city buzzed around them, Eli began to share fragments of his past, stories of a broken family, the absence of steady care, and the harsh streets that had become both home and prison. He spoke of nights spent in shelters that offered little comfort, of meals that were scarce and unpredictable, and the constant shadow of fear that followed him. Alexander listened intently, absorbing the weight of each word. The boy's narrative was not just a tale of hardship, but a reflection of systemic failures that had left him vulnerable. It was a world far removed from Alexander's own upbringing, yet the emotional undercurrents, loss, longing, and the search for safety resonated deeply. "What happened to your family?" Alexander asked gently. Eli's eyes darkened. "They couldn't take care of me. Things got bad. I had to leave." His voice trembled slightly, but he pushed on. "I don't want to go back." Alexander's heart tightened. The boy's pain was palpable, yet so was his determination to survive against all odds. Over the course of their conversations, Alexander learned of Eli's small acts of kindness, sharing food with younger children, helping others find shelter, and holding on to the belief that things could get better. These glimpses of generosity amid struggle painted a picture of a boy who, despite everything, had not lost his humanity. In turn, Alexander began to share parts of his own story, carefully peeling back the layers of his guarded life. He spoke of his lonely childhood, the sacrifices made to escape poverty, and the emotional isolation that success had brought. The exchange was tentative at first, but as trust grew, so did the openness between them. One evening, as the city lights flickered on and the streets emptied, Alexander confided, "I built walls around myself, thinking that was strength. But sometimes it just made me feel more alone." Eli looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe what we both need is to find a way to break those walls down." Their conversations became a bridge between two worlds, one shaped by wealth and ambition, the other by survival and hope. Alexander's perception of Eli evolved from that of a homeless child to a young person with dreams, fears, and a resilience that challenged his own assumptions. As their bond deepened, Alexander found himself questioning the meaning of his wealth and the impact he truly wanted to have. The polished boardrooms and high-rise offices suddenly felt distant and hollow compared to the raw authenticity of his time with Eli. One afternoon, Alexander invited Eli to visit his office, a sleek space filled with glass and steel, overlooking the city skyline. The boy's eyes widened in awe and apprehension as he stepped inside, his gaze lingering on the stark contrast between this world and the streets he knew. Alexander showed Eli around, explaining the work he did and the decisions that shaped industries and communities. But more importantly, he shared his desire to use his resources to make a meaningful difference. "This place," Alexander said, "has given me a lot, but I want it to mean more, not just for me, but for people like you." Eli's expression softened, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. "Do you really think things can change?" Alexander nodded firmly. "I believe they can, but it starts with listening and understanding, and with people like you helping me see the truth." The visit marked a turning point. Alexander realized that his connection with Eli was not just a chance encounter, but a catalyst for transformation. The boy's story had opened his eyes to realities he had long ignored, and now he was determined to act. Together, they began to explore ways to address the challenges Eli and others like him faced. Alexander listened as Eli described the gaps in support, the barriers to education and opportunity, and the stigma that cloaked homelessness in silence. Inspired by Eli's insight, Alexander started to envision initiatives that went beyond charity, programs aimed at empowerment, education, and systemic change. The boy's experiences became a guiding force, grounding Alexander's ambitions in the lived realities of those he sought to help. Their partnership also brought moments of genuine warmth and laughter, rare and precious amid the hardships. Alexander saw Eli's playful side, the spark of childhood that hardship had not extinguished, and Eli saw in Alexander a mentor and ally who believed in his potential. Yet, beneath the growing bond lay the complexities of trust and vulnerability. Eli remained cautious, aware of the transient nature of promises made by adults in a world that had often disappointed him. Alexander grappled with his own fears, the fear of failure, of inadequacy, and of confronting a system resistant to change. Despite these challenges, their connection endured, fueled by mutual respect and a shared vision for a better future. Alexander's world expanded beyond contracts and profits, embracing the messy, human stories that define the city's streets. As days blended into weeks, Alexander found himself transformed, not just by the boy's story, but by the deep, human connection they forged. Eli's resilience and honesty challenged him to rethink everything he believed about success, happiness, and purpose. And for Eli, Alexander became more than a stranger offering fleeting kindness. He became a symbol of hope, a bridge to possibilities once thought out of reach. Together, they navigated the uncertain terrain of trust and change, two unlikely companions bound by a simple truth: that true transformation begins not with wealth or power, but with the willingness to see, to listen, and to care. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky as Alexander walked the narrow streets alongside Eli, the city's noise a distant murmur beneath the weight of what Alexander had just witnessed. They had passed an alley where a small group of teenagers loomed, their faces hardened by years of neglect and survival. Before Alexander could react, one of the older boys shoved Eli roughly against a graffiti-stained wall, sneering with a mix of hostility and territorial cruelty. Alexander's heart pounded fiercely, rage and protectiveness surging through him in equal measure. He had never been one to back down from confrontation, yet this moment felt different, raw and urgent. He stepped forward, his voice sharp and commanding. "Leave him alone." The bullies turned, eyes narrowing as they assessed the unexpected challenge from a well-dressed man standing defiantly in the fading light. One spat on the ground, but Alexander did not flinch. He moved closer, his tone low but unwavering. "This boy doesn't deserve your cruelty. Walk away." Eli stood silently, his small frame tense but steady. The bullies exchanged glances, weighing their options. After a tense moment, they grumbled and backed off, disappearing into the shadows from which they'd emerged. Alexander exhaled slowly, the adrenaline ebbing as he placed a steadying hand on Eli's shoulder. "Are you all right?" Alexander asked, concern threading his voice. Eli nodded, though the flicker of fear in his eyes was unmistakable. "It happens a lot," he admitted quietly. "People see me as weak, easy to push around." Alexander's anger simmered beneath the surface. The streets were unforgiving, and Eli had learned to navigate a world where kindness was scarce and threats were constant. Watching the boy endure this daily trial stirred something fierce within Alexander, a determination to protect, to fight for a child who had so little defense. They continued walking, but the encounter lingered in Alexander's mind, sharpening his resolve. He knew that Eli's challenges were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader, harsh reality that too many faced. The city's glittering towers masked a darker undercurrent, a world of fear, vulnerability, and injustice. That evening, Alexander sat alone in his office, the city lights flickering below like distant stars. His hands clenched into fists as he replayed the day's events. The bullying was not just a moment of cruelty, but a symptom of systemic failure, the lack of safety, support, and opportunity for children like Eli. He thought of the boy's quiet strength, the resilience that had brought him this far despite the odds. But resilience alone was not enough. Eli needed protection, a shield against the dangers that lurked in the shadows, and more than that, a chance to break free from the cycle of fear. Determined to act, Alexander reached out to his closest advisors, setting in motion plans to create a safe space for Eli and others like him, a place where children could find shelter, support, and hope. He envisioned a community center, staffed by trusted mentors, offering education, counseling, and a refuge from the streets. Days later, Alexander returned to the park where he had first begun to understand Eli's world. He found the boy sitting on the same worn bench, eyes scanning the horizon with a cautious hope. Alexander sat beside him, the weight of unspoken promises hanging between them. "I'm working on something for you," Alexander said quietly. "A place where you can be safe, where no one can hurt you." Eli's eyes lifted, a flicker of disbelief mingling with hope. "Do you really mean that?" Alexander nodded, his voice firm. "I do. But it will take time and your help. I want you to be part of it." The boy considered this, the guarded walls around him softening ever so slightly. "I don't want to get my hopes up," he whispered. "People say things, but then they go away." Alexander understood the fear behind those words. He reached out, gripping Eli's hand gently but firmly. "I won't go away. Not this time." Over the coming weeks, Alexander's commitment deepened. He visited shelters, met with social workers, and consulted experts to better understand the needs of homeless youth. Each visit reinforced the urgency of his mission and the gaps in the current system. Meanwhile, Eli began to open up more, sharing fears and dreams he had long kept hidden. He spoke of wanting to learn, to have a future not defined by survival, but by possibility. Alexander listened, each conversation strengthening the bond between them. Yet the path was not without obstacles. Some in Alexander's circle questioned the wisdom of diverting resources towards such a cause, warning of financial risks and public relations challenges. Others doubted Eli's trustworthiness, influenced by prejudice and skepticism. Alexander faced these doubts with quiet determination. He knew that change required courage, not just from him, but from those willing to see beyond stereotypes and stigma. Eli's trust was fragile, but it was real, and that was enough to fuel Alexander's resolve. One cold evening, as they walked through a dimly lit street, Eli paused, his breath clouding the air. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, vulnerability breaking through. Alexander looked down at the boy, the city's lights reflecting in his eyes. "Because I see you," he said simply, "not just as someone who needs help, but as someone who deserves to be seen and heard." Eli's lips curled into a tentative smile. "Maybe there's more to people like you than I thought." The moment was quiet but profound, a bridge spanning the divide between two worlds. Alexander realized that protecting Eli was not just about offering safety, but about restoring dignity and hope. As they continued their walk, the city around them seemed less daunting, transformed by the possibility of change. Alexander felt a growing certainty that together they could confront the dangers of the streets and build something lasting. A future where children like Eli could thrive without fear. The encounter with the bullies had been a harsh reminder of the realities Eli faced daily, but it had also ignited a fire within Alexander, a fire that would not be extinguished by obstacles or doubt. This was a fight worth having, a mission that transcended business deals and boardrooms. And as the night deepened, Alexander and Eli moved forward side by side, bound by a shared determination to rewrite their stories and challenge the city's indifference with compassion and courage. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of one of Alexander's lesser-used properties on the outskirts of the city, a modest, weathered building that had long been overlooked amid gleaming skyscrapers and bustling streets. Today it was transformed. Inside, soft blankets and warm meals replaced cold floors and empty stomachs. A quiet hope had taken root in the air, fragile but persistent. Alexander stood near the entrance, watching as Eli moved through the small space with cautious curiosity. The boy's eyes lingered on the simple comforts: a clean bed, a small desk with books, a warm cup of tea waiting on a battered table. It was a stark contrast to the chaos and coldness of the streets he had known for so long. "I thought this might be a good place to start," Alexander said gently, stepping beside Eli. "Somewhere you can feel safe, even if just for a little while." Eli nodded slowly, his gaze still scanning the room as if wary that the moment might be too good to last. "It's better than the streets," he admitted quietly, "but it still feels strange." Alexander understood. Trust wasn't built in a day, especially for someone who had learned to rely solely on themselves. "Take your time," he said. "There's no rush. This is your space now." In the days that followed, the building became a haven not just for Eli, but for several other children Alexander had connected with through the shelters and street outreach programs. Each arrived with their own stories of hardship and survival, their eyes reflecting the same mixture of fear and hope that Eli had carried. Alexander found himself spending more time there than he had anticipated, sitting with the children, listening to their stories, and learning about the challenges they faced. He saw firsthand the gaps in support, the difficulty accessing education, the lack of stable housing, and the deep-seated mistrust of adults who promised help but often failed to deliver. Eli, despite his initial reservations, began to open up. He helped organize small tasks around the house, shared his street wisdom with newcomers, and tentatively accepted the kindness offered. The transformation was subtle but undeniable, a flicker of stability amid years of uncertainty. One afternoon, as rain pattered softly against the windows, Alexander sat with Eli at the small kitchen table. The boy was absorbed in a worn notebook, scribbling words and sketches with a focus that spoke of dreams long suppressed. "What are you working on?" Alexander asked, leaning in. Eli looked up, a shy smile touching his lips. "Stories," he said. "Things I want to say, but haven't had the chance before." Alexander nodded, impressed. "I'd love to read them when you're ready." The boy's eyes brightened at the encouragement, a small but significant step toward reclaiming a voice silenced by hardship. Alexander also began to weave together resources and support systems around the shelter, a network of educators, counselors, and mentors who could offer more than just shelter. He understood that comfort was only the beginning. Real change required opportunities for growth, learning, and healing. One evening, as the house settled into quiet, Alexander and Eli stood outside under a sky dusted with stars. The boy's gaze lifted upward, a sense of wonder replacing the guardedness that had long defined him. "Do you think people like me can really change?" Eli asked, voice soft but earnest. Alexander looked at him, the weight of his promise clear in his eyes. "I don't just think it, I know it. You're stronger than you realize." Eli smiled, the first genuine smile Alexander had seen in weeks. "Thanks," he whispered. But alongside these moments of hope, Alexander remained aware of the fragility of their progress. The streets were never far away, and the threats that lurked there remained real. He knew that to truly protect these children, they needed more than a safe house. They needed a future. With that in mind, Alexander began drafting plans for longer-term programs, education scholarships, vocational training, and partnerships with community organizations. He envisioned a path that extended beyond temporary refuge, one that could break the cycle of homelessness and despair. Eli became a partner in these efforts, his insights invaluable. He spoke candidly about the barriers he and others faced, the stigma, the bureaucratic obstacles, the fear of failure. His perspective grounded Alexander's ambitions in reality, preventing idealism from overshadowing practical needs. One day, Eli confided in Alexander about his dream of returning to school, something that had seemed impossible just weeks before. "I want to learn," he said simply, "to have a chance at something better." Alexander felt a swell of pride and determination. "We'll make it happen," he promised. Their relationship evolved into a partnership built on trust and shared purpose. Alexander was no longer just a benefactor, but a mentor and ally, while Eli transformed from a wary survivor into a young person with hope and direction. Yet, beneath the progress lay the ever-present challenge of balancing caution with courage. Eli's past experiences had taught him to expect disappointment, and Alexander grappled with the fear of failing those who had come to rely on him. Still, every small victory, a warm meal, a completed homework assignment, a smile shared in the quiet of the night, fueled their resolve. They were building more than a shelter. They were building a foundation for futures once thought unreachable. As the days turned into weeks, Alexander's vision expanded. The modest building was just the beginning, a symbol of what could be achieved when resources met compassion, and when trust was cultivated with patience and respect. Eli's transformation was a testament to that possibility. From a boy hardened by the streets, he was becoming a young man reclaiming his life, one step at a time. And in this shared journey, Alexander found something he had long sought, but never fully grasped. A purpose beyond wealth, a meaning rooted in connection, and a profound impact of offering more than just charity, offering a chance. In the quiet moments after the day's bustle had settled, Alexander found himself alone in the dim glow of his study, surrounded by the artifacts of his life, framed photographs, awards, and shelves lined with books that had charted his rise to power. Yet tonight, these symbols of achievement felt hollow, shadows of a past he had long tried to outrun. His thoughts drifted back to Eli, to the boy's fearless honesty and the fragile hope that now tethered him to a future beyond the streets. Alexander's heart ached with a mixture of pride and regret, the weight of his own history pressing down like a silent confession. He recalled his childhood, years marked by absence and sacrifice, by the relentless pursuit of success at the cost of emotional connection. The walls he had built around himself, brick by brick, had been both fortress and prison. In his quest to escape poverty, he had learned to suppress vulnerability, to wear armor forged from ambition and control. But Eli's story had cracked that armor, exposing wounds Alexander had long ignored. He saw in the boy's resilience a mirror of his own struggles, yet also a chance to rewrite the narrative, to heal the fractures left by years of isolation. The realization was both unsettling and liberating. Alexander understood that helping Eli was not just an act of charity, but a journey toward reclaiming his own humanity. The next morning, he arrived at the modest shelter, finding Eli seated by the window, sunlight casting patterns across his thoughtful face. Alexander approached quietly, settling into the chair beside him. "I've been thinking," Alexander began, voice soft, "about my past, about how I built walls to protect myself." Eli looked up, curiosity mingling with empathy. "What kind of walls?" "Emotional ones," Alexander admitted. "I was afraid to let people in, to show weakness. It made me strong on the outside, but lonely inside." Eli nodded slowly. "I get that. I've had to be tough, too. It's hard to trust when people keep letting you down." Their shared vulnerability forged a deeper connection, bridging the gap between their experiences. Alexander realized that his role extended beyond providing shelter and support. It was about fostering trust and healing wounds that money alone could not mend. Together, they began to explore ways to break down those walls, not just for Eli, but for others who carried similar burdens. They talked about the importance of community, of safe spaces where emotions could be expressed without fear of judgment. Alexander invited counselors and mentors to visit the shelter, creating opportunities for the children to engage in conversations about their pasts and futures. He witnessed moments of breakthrough, tears shed, stories shared, and the tentative beginnings of trust. These encounters stirred memories of his own childhood counselors, the few adults who had offered kindness amidst chaos. Alexander recognized that healing was a process, one that required patience and unwavering support. In quiet moments, Eli confided his fears, the anxiety that he might never escape the shadows of his past, the uncertainty of a future still clouded by doubt. Alexander listened, offering reassurance grounded not in empty promises, but in shared commitment. "I'm here," Alexander said firmly. "Not just today, but for the long haul." Eli's eyes reflected a fragile hope, a spark that had been kindled through their growing bond. As weeks passed, Alexander's perspective continued to evolve. He confronted his own fears, the fear of failure, of inadequacy, and of confronting a system resistant to change. He grappled with the realization that true strength lay not in control, but in vulnerability. This self-awareness fueled his determination to create lasting change. He began advocating within his business circles for initiatives that prioritized emotional well-being alongside financial success. He challenged colleagues to reconsider metrics of achievement, urging a more compassionate approach. Yet the path was fraught with challenges. Skepticism met his efforts, and old habits of detachment threatened to resurface. But Alexander found renewed purpose in the progress he witnessed among the children, in the stories of resilience and growth. One evening, as he walked Eli home from a community meeting, the boy turned to him with a newfound confidence. "I'm starting to believe that my past doesn't have to define me." Alexander smiled, the weight of years lifting slightly. "That's the first step. The rest is up to you, and I'll be here every step of the way." Their journey was far from over, but in that moment, the walls that once separated them felt less formidable. Together, they were building bridges between past and future, pain and healing, isolation and connection. In the quiet aftermath of their shared struggles, Alexander discovered a truth more profound than any business triumph: that healing oneself often begins with helping another, and that the courage to be vulnerable can open the door to a life transformed. The morning light spilled through the towering windows of Alexander's office as he stood before a gathering of reporters and cameras, the hum of anticipation filling the sleek room. Today marked the official launch of his new philanthropic initiative, a foundation dedicated to addressing youth homelessness and empowering vulnerable children like Eli. The transformation from corporate titan to compassionate advocate was complete in this moment, yet the journey that had led him here was etched deeply in his expression. As the press conference unfolded, Alexander spoke with a clarity and passion that surprised even those accustomed to his polished speeches. He shared the story of a chance encounter with a child on the streets, a boy named Eli, whose resilience and honesty had opened his eyes to a world far removed from boardrooms and balance sheets. His words cut through the usual corporate jargon, laying bare the human heart of the crisis he now sought to address. "I realized," Alexander said, voice steady but charged with emotion, "that success is not measured by wealth alone, but by the impact we have on lives." Eli's story is a testament to the strength and potential of every child, regardless of their circumstances. The media responded with a mixture of admiration and curiosity, capturing the narrative of a billionaire shedding detachment to embrace empathy. Photographers snapped images of Alexander standing beside Eli, whose shy smile and hopeful eyes became a symbol of resilience and possibility. Behind the scenes, Alexander worked tirelessly to build partnerships with community organizations, social workers, and educators. The Foundation's programs range from safe housing and counseling to education scholarships and vocational training, all designed to provide not just shelter, but a pathway to lasting change. Eli's involvement was central. He became a living, breathing face of the initiative, sharing his experiences at community events and inspiring others with his courage. His journey from the streets to the spotlight challenged stereotypes and invited empathy from a public often indifferent to the plight of homeless youth. Alexander also leveraged his business acumen to secure funding and resources, navigating corporate interests and political landscapes with renewed purpose. He confronted skepticism from some quarters, critics who questioned the sincerity of his transformation or doubted the effectiveness of philanthropic efforts. Yet, the Foundation's early successes spoke volumes. Children once trapped in cycles of despair found new opportunities. Families reconnected. Communities rallied around a cause that had long been neglected. The media coverage shifted from curiosity to advocacy, highlighting stories of hope and renewal. One afternoon, as Alexander toured a newly opened community center funded by the foundation, he observed children laughing and learning, their faces illuminated by the glow of possibilities. Eli stood nearby, now confident and engaged, guiding younger kids through art projects and sharing his story with an authenticity that moved everyone present. Alexander approached him, pride swelling in his chest. "You've come a long way," he said quietly. Eli smiled, eyes shining. "We both have." Their partnership had grown beyond mentor and mentee into a shared mission. Proof that change was possible when compassion met action. The foundation's ripple effect extended beyond the city's borders, inspiring similar initiatives and sparking conversations about systemic change. Alexander's transformation became a case study in leadership redefined, not by profit margins, but by human connection and social responsibility. Yet, amid the accolades and progress, Alexander remained grounded in the knowledge that the work was far from over. He continued to listen, to learn, and to adapt, aware that true change required persistence and humility. Late one evening, alone in his office, Alexander reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The chance encounter that shattered his complacency, the bond forged with a boy who had taught him the meaning of resilience, and the awakening of a purpose that transcended personal success. He understood now that wealth could open doors, but it was empathy that unlocked hearts. And in that understanding lay the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. As the city skyline glittered beyond his window, Alexander felt a renewed sense of hope, a hope grounded in the belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could ignite a movement, and that together they could build a future where every child had the chance to thrive. The boardroom was thick with tension as Alexander sat at the head of the long mahogany table, surrounded by executives whose expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. The walls, adorned with accolades and financial charts, seemed to close in on him as he presented his latest initiative, an ambitious expansion of the foundation's work to tackle youth homelessness on a systemic level. The stakes were high, and the resistance palpable. Investing so heavily in social programs, one senior executive remarked, voice dripping with doubt, could jeopardize shareholder confidence. "Our primary responsibility is to maximize returns." Another chimed in, "Philanthropy is admirable, but should not come at the expense of the company's bottom line." Alexander steeled himself, the familiar weight of corporate pressure settling over him. Yet beneath the polished arguments and financial jargon, he sensed an undercurrent of discomfort, an unspoken fear of change, of stepping beyond the safe confines of profit and tradition. He took a breath, steadying his resolve. "Our responsibility extends beyond profits," he began, voice measured but firm. "We have the resources and influence to effect real change. Ignoring that is not just a missed opportunity. It's a failure of leadership." The room fell silent, the challenge hanging in the air like a gauntlet thrown. Alexander pressed on, outlining the tangible benefits of the foundation's work: improve community relations, enhance corporate reputation, and, most importantly, the lives transformed by their support. Yet, the pushback was relentless. Concerns about costs, risks, and shareholder reactions echoed through the room, threatening to undermine the progress made outside these walls. Amid the corporate turmoil, Alexander found strength in a source often overlooked: the unwavering trust and progress of Eli. The boy's journey from the streets to a symbol of hope had become a beacon, illuminating the path forward amid uncertainty. Later that day, Alexander met with Eli at the community center, the noise of children's laughter and chatter a comforting backdrop. Eli's eyes held a quiet determination as he recounted his experiences speaking at recent events, sharing his story with candor and courage. "People listen when I talk," Eli said, voice steady, "but some still doubt. They think I'm just a statistic. Alexander nodded, understanding the weight of such skepticism. Change is never easy. It challenges what people think they know. Eli's gaze met his. But if we give up, nothing changes. Their exchange reinforced Alexander's commitment. He knew the road ahead was fraught with obstacles, but the stakes were too high to waver. In the following weeks, Alexander balanced the demands of corporate leadership with the relentless push of his philanthropic mission. Board meetings were battles of wills. Public relations required careful navigation. Partnerships demanded delicate diplomacy. Yet, amidst the challenges, the Foundation's work continued to flourish. New programs launched, communities engaged, and stories of transformation multiplied. The ripple effect of their efforts began to soften resistance, turning skepticism into cautious optimism. Alexander also witnessed personal growth in himself and in Eli. The boy's resilience and unwavering trust became a source of inspiration, reminding Alexander why the fight was worth every sacrifice. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Alexander received a message from Eli, a photo of a group of children gathered around a makeshift stage, listening intently as Eli shared his story. The caption read simply, "Hope spreads." Alexander smiled, the exhaustion fading in the glow of that simple truth. He realized that leadership was not about avoiding struggle, but about persevering through it, about standing firm in the face of doubt and pushing forward with conviction. As the city lights flickered outside his window, Alexander prepared for the next challenge, bolstered by the knowledge that their partnership was more than a chance encounter. It was a catalyst for lasting change. Together, they were rewriting the narrative, proving that empathy and determination could overcome even the most entrenched barriers. And in that shared journey lay the promise of a future where every child could find safety, opportunity, and the chance to dream. Under a bright autumn sky, the community center stood alive with laughter and anticipation as Alexander and Eli arrived hand in hand. The grand opening was more than a ceremony. It was a celebration of resilience, hope, and a collective effort to rewrite destinies. Banners fluttered in the crisp breeze, colorful balloons danced above the entrance, and the vibrant hum of families and children filled the air. Inside, the walls were adorned with artwork created by the children who had found sanctuary here, expressions of pain, dreams, and newfound joy painted in bold strokes and vivid colors. The center's rooms buzzed with activity. Classrooms where eager voices practiced reading, workshops where hands shaped crafts, and quiet corners where stories were shared and healing began. Alexander moved through the crowd with a quiet pride, his eyes searching for Eli. He found the boy near the front stage, standing tall and confident, a far cry from the wary child who had first crossed his path on the city streets. Eli's smile was radiant, his presence a beacon to all who had gathered. As the ceremony began, Alexander took the podium, his voice steady and heartfelt. He spoke of transformation, not just of bricks and mortar, but of lives changed by compassion and commitment. He recounted the journey that had brought him here, a chance encounter, a question asked, a bond formed that had challenged everything he thought he knew about success and happiness. This center, Alexander said, is more than a building. It is a promise that every child, regardless of their past, deserves a future filled with opportunity, safety, and love. The crowd erupted in applause, the sound swelling like a wave of shared hope. Eli stepped forward, his voice clear and earnest as he addressed the audience. He spoke of fear and hardship, of nights spent in uncertainty, but also of the power of kindness and the strength found in community. People saw me as lost, Eli said, but here, I found a family. Here, I found a chance to dream. Tears glistened on the faces of many as Eli's words echoed through the room, a testament to resilience and the human spirit's capacity for renewal. Outside, families mingled, children played, and volunteers shared stories of the lives touched by the Foundation's work. Alexander watched, heart full, as the center pulsed with life, a tangible embodiment of the hope he and Eli had fought to nurture. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alexander and Eli stood together on the center steps, the city's skyline glowing behind them. The journey from that first encounter to this moment felt surreal, yet profoundly real, a testament to the power of empathy and determination. Eli turned to Alexander, eyes shining. "Thank you for seeing me." Alexander smiled, a warmth spreading through him. "Thank you for trusting me." In that exchange, years of pain, growth, and transformation converged, a silent vow to continue the work, to honor the past by building a future where no child would feel invisible or alone. As twilight settled, the city around them seemed softer, touched by the promise of change. Together, Alexander and Eli stepped forward, ready to embrace the challenges and triumphs ahead. Their story, once a simple question on a crowded sidewalk, had blossomed into a movement, a beacon of hope shining through the urban night. And in that light, the possibilities were endless. If you love the story, like the video and subscribe.